Hello, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Anthony DeSimone with my 7th edition of Penguins Pointers tonight. Looking at the headlines, a lot of stuff going on with the Penguins in the past week. First and foremost, they do have a new head coach. Mike Sullivan has replaced Mike Johnston behind the bench. Rob Scuderi has been traded to Chicago for Trevor Daley. Marc-Andre Fleury is out for the game on Wednesday and possibly a week or two with a concussion. Bo Bennett is now out 4 to 6 weeks with an upper body injury he suffered in the loss to the Capitals. And to accommodate for some of this, there have been some line adjustments and some minor league call-ups have been made by the new coach. So let's go through and break down some of these headlines and make some sense of all this news that's going on around in the Burgh for the Penguins. First of all, let's talk about coaching here in Pittsburgh. It's a revolving door. I'll be honest with you. It's a revolving door. This is now the 22nd coach for the Pittsburgh Penguins in their history. His history includes coaching for a couple teams such as the Boston Bruins and being on some assistant coaching roles. He had also played in the NHL for, I believe, 700 games. And most recently, he was the player development coach for Chicago last year when they won the Cup. So the man does have experience. My problem with it is it's a revolving door for coaches in Pittsburgh. I don't understand why we waited until 29 games into the season, 28, to go, let's get rid of Johnston. If you didn't like what you saw in the offseason is when you tell a coach, you know what? You're not going to be back next season with us. I don't agree with the coaching change in the middle of the season. The coaching change was necessary. Mike Johnston's systems weren't working for the Penguins, and they kind of didn't really have a strong identity. And we were kind of all waiting to see if maybe it would come to fruition in the first 20 games of the season, but it didn't. So I agree with the coaching change, but I don't agree with the fact that you take a coaching position out in the middle of the season, especially after you see a big news development, for example, with Pascal Dupuis's retirement. It's just too much news going on at one time, especially with the sensitivity of Dupuis in that locker room and how very sensitive of a topic that is for players and coaching staff alike, as he was a very likable person for the team, and he will be missed. Hopefully they'll give him a coaching role in the next season or two after his contract is officially up. But back to the fact of the matter is, it's not a good time to change the coach. You either have to do this off-season or right at the start of the season. You cannot go and let a coach run through and start setting up with players 20, 30 games and expect yourself to play well under a new coach and expect to make the playoffs, which at this rate and with some of the other news we're going to talk about, I just don't see it happening this year. I don't see a run at the Cup, and I really don't see really much of a playoff chance either at this rate if things don't get better. But that's just my thought on the coaching. You know, it's a revolving door here in Pittsburgh, and if you look at other teams in Pittsburgh, for example, the Pittsburgh Steelers, they've had 3 head coaches. Look how successful they were, and still are. Take a page out of their book. Stop changing the coach every 15 minutes because you don't like your record. It's not always the coach. Sometimes it's the players. Which we go down to that second point. Crosby needs a wake-up call here. I understand he's a great athlete, but he's not playing like the great athlete we all know and love him as. He's playing as, to be honest, mediocre right now. I don't know what the issue is with him. I really don't. I'm not picking up on what his issue is, but he needs a wake-up call. My wake-up call is this. Put him on the second line. Put Malkin up on the first line. Put Crosby on the second line. He needs something. You got to get something in him to show him that the team is not happy with the way he's performing and give him a reprimand for his lack of playing. Washington Capitals did it. When Alexander Ovechkin was throwing a fit over in Washington, what did the coach do? He benched him. And he came back, got his head on straight, and had a great season that year. That needs to happen to Crosby. We're too soft on him, and I think what needs to happen is bump him off to the second line and put Malkin on the first, because honestly, Malkin is playing with a ton of heart out on the ice, and he deserves that first line spot. So, Penguin fans will disagree, but You need some kind of wake up with Crosby. That or you take that C off his jersey. I don't know. Some people are saying that. I say put him on the second line and tell him you need to play better if you want to be on that first line. Because his plus-minus is atrocious. I mean, it really is. I mean, that means that he is being scored on more than he is helping score. So some people throw that stat out, but that's an important stat. If you're not scoring and letting up goals, you're not having a good season. And that's what the plus-minus is telling me. As for the trade with Rob Scuderi, I agree with it. Rob Scuderi was a great asset to the Pittsburgh Penguins. He helped them win the Stanley Cup back in 2008-2009, but he hasn't really been doing a ton since, and Penguin fans don't like that he is on the team, and who we're getting, Trevor Daley from Chicago, I think was a good trade. Scuderi's more of a defensive defenseman. Trevor Daley's a bit of more of an aggressive offensive defenseman. And I think that's something that the Penguins needed. They need somebody out on that ice that's going to go out there and hit players. And I feel like we're not doing enough of those big punishing hits on the board to give us a little bit of more space on those boards when we need it later in the second and third periods. So hopefully Trevor Daley will be the solution to that problem. As for injuries and rotten luck, that's what the Penguins have right now. Injuries and rotten luck. A lot of shots not going in the net. A lot of stuff hitting the crossbar and the sidebars not going in. And now we're getting injury struck. Fleury's out 2 weeks. That's huge. Bo Bennett's out 4 to 6 weeks. A player that was developing really nicely now has to sit out. And I honestly was seeing a little bit of chemistry between him and Crosby on that first line. So this is going to be tough to see who's going to fill that spot. And that might be contributing to why Crosby's not having a good season, is he doesn't have that go-to guy like Dupuis was on his right wing side, you know. But so Bennett's out. Letang is still out with his injury. It's not looking good. It's really not looking good for Pittsburgh right now. And that's the whole essence of the last point we have on the bottom. Things are going to get worse before they get better. I wouldn't be surprised if New Year's, when we struck into 2016, that the Penguins aren't 500 or worse. I don't see them turning it around here. I really don't. There's too many injuries. The coach is trying to do some line changes here to see what'll work, and we'll go through the lines and read them to you real quick in just a second, but I don't expect much, really. I'm not. You know, I'm hopeful, but I don't see it. I don't see it with the changes that are happening. There's too many variables being moved around. And in a science experiment, the more variables that you change, the harder it is to find out what the actual problem was. And that's what's happening in Pittsburgh, and that's what happens to Pittsburgh every year. They're not happy with their development. They start mixing, matching, moving things. We don't know what works and what doesn't, and we end up staggering to the finish line every season. If you're going to change something, change one thing at a time and see what works. But let's move to these line changes. Real quick, they did call up from Wilkes-Barre goaltender Matt Murray to have a backup for Zakhoff tonight and possibly Friday and Saturday. They have 3 games in the next 4 days. We'll get to that later. And they called up forwards Connor Sheary and Kevin Porter. Both forwards. So that's probably to replace Bennett. And we'll see what they end up doing with those line changes. But as for the lineup right now, I'm not a fan of some of the line changes we made. On the first line, you have Crosby at center, Perron right, Kunitz left. Second line is Malkin center, Hornquist right, Plotnikov left. Third is Fair at center, back to his original position instead of a winger, which I agree with that. Sprong on the right, Kessel on the left. And on the fourth line, they have Cullen and Bonino probably rotating with one of the forwards from the minor leagues. So, I don't like that Kessel's on the third line. I think Kessel's been performing and playing well for the Penguins this year. I don't understand why he is on the third line. Wouldn't you want to give a player that is doing well more ice time? But Mike Sullivan's got some kind of plan. He was calling everything a process in post-game interviews. Everything's a process with Sullivan, so let's see what kind of process he brings to the Pittsburgh Penguins. But I don't agree with that. I think what needs to happen is you flip-flop Kessel and Kunitz. That's not to say Kunitz is not playing well. Kunitz is developing into a different player this season. He is hitting a lot more. He's being a lot more aggressive and grinding than a first-line winger is. I think put him on the third line with Eric Fehr, make that your bully line, put Trevor Daley defensively with them. That's the line that goes out and hits everybody. There's a play somebody doesn't like, you put the third line with that defensive rotation out there, and you go hit people. That's what I think. That's that bulky line that we need right now, and we don't have. So, as for the power play, he made some changes there as well. Malkin and Warsofsky will be at the point. Crosby, Perron, and Bonino will be down low on the first power play unit. I like that. We'll see. Warsofsky's got a nice slap shot, and so does Malkin, so we'll see if that pans out for the Penguins. On the second power play unit is Dumoulin and Mata up top, and Kessel, Hornquist, and Kunitz down low rotating. So a lot of changes going on there. We'll see what will happen. That power play has gone scoreless in its last 6 games now. I believe they're 0 for 13. So they're in one of those stints where they're not doing anything right now. So hopefully that'll make some changes. Speaking of changes, let's take a look at those standings. Standings are not looking good. We have now fallen 11 points out of first place. The Washington Capitals hold that top spot with an impressive 21-6-2 record with 44 points. Rangers on the nip of their heels with 42, and the Islanders not far behind with 41. The Devils have surpassed the Penguins and now have 36 points. The Penguins find themselves in 5th with 33, with the Flyers right behind them at 32. Carolina and Columbus round out the bottom. What's interesting to note here is the Capitals have their lead in the standings in the Metro with 3 less games under their belt. The Rangers and Islanders have both played 32. The Capitals have played 29. That is 3 games. That is 6 extra points the Capitals can have on those 2 teams. So keep that in mind. The Capitals are positioned very well right now, and they should be the team in the Metro that everybody's looking out for here. So I wouldn't be surprised if we find ourselves in the 6th, maybe if Carolina has a good stretch in the 7th spot, honestly, by New Year's. If things don't get better, I expect 500 by the time January rolls in, and there's still a decent amount of games to be played before then. So hopefully I'm wrong, but that's what I'm honestly thinking is going to happen. So we shall see. Like I said, things will probably get better or worse before they get better. Transitioning to the next game, which is tonight. It's a home-at-home series. They'll be facing off twice against the Boston Bruins, one tonight in Boston at 8 p.m., and then they come home to play them Friday at 7. Boston currently holding, I think, the 4th spot in their division with about a 16-9-4 record for 36 points, so not doing as well as they are hoping this year, but they are doing better than the Penguins are, so there's that. Tonight's going to be interesting because Fleury won't be in net. With all these changes going on, Fleury out of the net, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of strategy Sullivan brings to the ice with his team. Hopefully, they'll play smart and understand the power of Boston and play defensively and protect Zadkov. Because this is big. This would be a huge 4 points if they can rack up 2 wins against them. Or even just split the series and stay 500. But, I mean, it's going to be tough tonight. Penguins fans, it's going to be a rough night. If we squeak out with a point, I'll be surprised. But I just think Boston's probably going to have a decent shot of just coming in and rolling over us. There's just too much going on, too many changes happening in Pittsburgh. And to me, it just seems like a lot of confusion going on in that locker room. And now without your star goaltender Fleury in the net, it's not looking good. So feel free to tune in anyway for these 2 games, but just keep in mind as you're watching that TV set, try to keep your emotions in balance and try not to let that frustration get to you, because understand things will get worse before they get better, and that's just part of a new coach happening. Columbus was an exception. Columbus didn't have any injuries when the season started. Columbus didn't have power play issues. They just didn't have a good coach. I still think the fact that we look back over the course of history at some coaches that we have let go and their successes. Let's take a look. Michel Therrien, we got rid of him. Where'd he go? Montreal. What's he been doing? Coaching very well for the Canadiens. I don't know why we fired him. Then you have Dan Bylsma. Dan Bylsma, also a great coach, won a cup for the Penguins. He's now in Buffalo, and he is turning the program in Buffalo around. They're actually not in dead last yet. I believe they're pretty close to 500 and holding well, considering that's good. To see a team that is always the bottom of the barrel at 500, that's good coaching. Once again, the revolving door of not letting coaches get their systems in place and set up is where the Penguins are. So, just a thought for you to think about while you're watching the game tonight is probably Boston will roll over the Penguins, but maybe we need to stop that revolving door coaches. But for now, I want to thank you guys all for listening into this edition of Penguins Pointers. Please hit that like button below and subscribe if you haven't already, and let's go Pens. Let's hope they get at least a point tonight, guys. Take care.